Sometimes I walk around the formal gardens at the Oklahoma State University campus and I look for these little moths and they're flying around. It's hard to catch them in one spot where you can get a really good picture of them. This photo is not actually on the OSU campus. It's at the Botanic Gardens, which does belong to OSU, but it's on the west side of town. And I took this shortly after I took last week's photo. I believe these flowers are called Verbena, possibly Mexican Verbena. I'm not sure. So if someone watching this or reading this knows for sure, please feel free to correct me. I'm always willing to learn. And I saw this little white moth floating from flower to flower. And I thought, well, I wonder if I can get a good picture of this thing. And as luck would have it, I ended up with like a super good, I almost said perfect, but there's always room for improvement, a really good profile shot of this moth on this flower. And it was actually drinking. You can see it's got this proboscis sticking out of its head. It's about to take a sip of nectar from this flower. And so I had this split second where it wasn't going to move. And I was able to kind of pivot myself around and take this macro shot. This moth is probably 1 inch, maybe slightly bigger from like the top of the wing to the bottom of its body. So it's a really small. It's a small subject on some very tiny flowers, and there's a little bit of motion. You can see one of its antennae is like blurry. That's either depth of field at work or it's moving really fast. I'm not sure which, but there's also the motion of that proboscis. It's curved, which means it's in the middle of being extended. So it captures a bit of motion in a kind of a quiet, serene little image here. And what I like about this is everything is isolated. So when I see this type of scene at the OSU campus, there's all these other colors. There's a lot going on because it's usually in a big flower bed. Well, here, the purple flower and the white moth are totally isolated against the green background. So it's a really cool picture to be able to take. I honestly forget what my exposure settings were for this as far as the aperture and the depth of field, the aperture, shutter, and ISO. But if I remember right, I think the aperture was probably about f8. Shutter was, I don't know. I use auto ISO, so I really never go below 200th of a second. What really matters to me when taking photos like this is aperture for depth of field, not necessarily shutter and ISO. And I forget what aperture I used, but it was small enough to get everything in sharp, but wide enough to get a really cool blurry foreground and background.